My name is Samson Kasumba, and this is the focal point. Let me begin with definitions, and I'll read the definition exactly the way it is. Corruption is the diversion of public resources for private, that is personal or none other than public use, and that's when one wants to gain or abuse a public authority or position for private gain and a weak public financial management system, leaving the poor open for corruption. Let's talk about corruption. And my guest this evening is Mr. Julius Kapwepwe, the Director of Programs at the Uganda Debt Network. You're very welcome, Julius.
Thank you. Yes, my pleasure to be here once more.
Since we met, do you think we are walking further on the right road to ending corruption, or are we stagnant?
I think generally the road is we are moving forward towards curbing corruption, but the road is so rugged that we are stagnating somewhere, even though we seem to see light at the end of the tunnel.
Okay. There have been significant steps made by government, the establishment of the anti-corruption unit, the president talking about corruption and the fight against corruption. He told us this was Chisanja Hakuna Mchezo, but yet we continue to see loans, taxes and grants being used. Do you think they're used in a prudent manner? Now that we're even talking about building roads in Congo, one would say, what about the ones we still have to build here?
Yeah, I think generally, as you observe, His Excellency President Museveni has been categorical against corruption. In fact, he has committed himself previously in 2006 onwards to date to zero tolerance to corruption. Beyond the words and big speeches, we seem to see an extent of positive move. But in some other areas, we see certain loopholes that remain glaring. It is evident that as a country, if you looked at the case of, say, petty corruption or small corruption, I could say small corruption, kintu kidogo, that a police officer has stopped you at the roadside and you are parted with the 5,000 shillings, is bad and bad enough, but is not as damaging as the, for instance, grand corruption, where we seem to see syndicated way of stealing. If you looked at some of these projects, therefore, the loans and other public resources generally that have been used, we see those kinds of instances. So even the Chisanja Hakuna Mchezo, to some extent, in terms of institutional establishment, could have achieved, but we have also seen where billions have continued to disappear.
So are you basically saying that as a government, we should be, in the fight against corruption, we should be looking at return on investment? Don't invest 100 million in punishing somebody who stole 10 million. That in itself, is that corruption?
We took public sector reforms to weed out the bad apples, to remove the corrupt, and to generally do cleanup. That nonetheless continued creeping through, and even in 2000s to where we are, we seem to be ready for another set of reforms. So that means that, for instance, in terms of institutions, there are those institutions, if you want to deliver a service to Ugandans, that you do not need. And that's where we are coming from, that you do not have to invest billions for you to be able to deliver or even get back millions.
Let me ask, do you think, because the supplementary budgets are on the increase, they are now in the trillions, would you consider that in a subtle way as syndicated corruption? Because how come we budget and all the time we have some supplementary budgets and they seem to be now going to the trillions?
Continued supplementary expenditures definitely undermine the credibility of the budget every financial year. That in Uganda, alas, has continued to be a creeping culture, and it is not the way to go.
Is it corruption?
The Constitution of Uganda of 1995, as amended, as well as the Public Finance and Accountability Act, Public Finance Management Act, is very categorical on how do you handle supplementaries. And it gives 3 conditions: unabsorbable, unforeseen, and unavoidable circumstances. Outside any of those 3, then it is a degree of corruption. In fact, if we took a sample of just this financial year, where we have seen about 6 supplementary budgets coming in day, evening, and night, it is a form of corruption. Why? We need to look at the specifics.
Do you have some examples?
Let's take just the COVID kind of related supplementaries.
Nobody could have seen COVID.
Precisely. But you're expected to deliver so much of masks across a spectrum of Ugandans. Have you received one yourself?
Never done. 82 billion.
Precisely, that's what we are talking about.
So if
you have a parliament that approves a supplementary budget, but goes and hides its own share, not through the main discussion on the parliamentary floor, but through a parliamentary commission. And in fact, even when you add up those billions of money, you still have certain sums of money, about 200 billion also, that is lingering, and it is not clear on where exactly it is. Then it is construed as corruption.
Do you think we see that this is wrong? Or are we at the point where those of us raising issues about it are the ones seen as having a problem?
I have an impression that, for instance, if you looked across the spectrum of public servants, not everyone is a rotten tomato. There are those diligent ladies and gentlemen we know about that not only have earned accolades, but actually can be seen in the way they do their work and deliver results for this country. So some, yes, but not all of them across the spectrum.
Let's get to how we get those who govern us through our electoral processes. Some have argued that if the means is questionable, it can't bring an end that is unquestionable. How we raise money to finance electoral campaigns, do you think there is an issue there? Some have large sums, some don't. In fact, some presidential candidates have already suspended campaigns over matters of inavailability of campaign finance.
Precisely, researches have been done, and even logically, it is known that if you have a questionable start process, it will give you a questionable end result. So to the extent that, for instance, we are not very, very clear, we do not have a seal on how much money should be involved in the electoral process.
Shouldn't one campaign fundraise locally and internationally?
That is not a problem. We need to be clear on how much should be the extent of money during the electoral process. What should be the sources of prudent money for electoral process and any other process. So the Financial Intelligence Authority therefore comes into it.
District budgets being used to finance campaigns. I mean, if I am an incumbent, I am intending to run towards the elections, I use the district finances to grade roads and do all these sorts of things to show what I'm doing. Is that also, in your opinion, corruption? And is there a way even of dealing with it, or should we be relying on one's morality?
That would constitute corruption, definitely, if you have public resources being diverted at whatever level, including at the district. In fact, the bigger challenge is not at the district levels, but at the central government. Recalling that trillions of shillings that out of a given budget, for instance, for this financial year, the previous financial year, for a budget of about 45 trillion or 42 as in the previous financial years, it is just about 3 trillion that makes it to the local governments. Of course, part of which is used for service delivery, and maybe part of that is what is involved through corrupt means. So it means that the central government, which retains a huge chunk of the fiscal resources, is where we should even be putting a bigger eye. And the Auditor General has been very, very categorical on where some of these monies have been stolen from ministries, departments, and agencies of government. And therefore, to that extent, it is possible that it is those monies that make their way into the electoral process. And we think that the law going forward needs to come and be stronger and curb some of these tendencies that are creeping in.
Do you think that as a nation, we understand that corruption, especially petty corruption, is as bad and dangerous as syndicated, or we now have corruption and corruption? In about 40 seconds.
We have, of course, petty corruption. We also have bureaucratic corruption, which is like the working with the systems that can frustrate. But we also have the grand or the political corruption. Of those three categories, the political corruption is where you seem to see syndicated type of affair. And we think that the syndicated one, the political or the grand corruption, is the most dangerous of the three.
Okay. Yeah. Julius Kapwepwe from Ugandan Debt Network, thank you so much for talking to us. Indeed, having been speaking about corruption, I don't want to be corrupt with time. Until next time, this has been The Focal Point.